Conan, you're in San Diego, is that right?
Yeah, correct.
Oh, I'm just up the road. I'm in Orange County.
Oh, yeah, you're like an hour and a half away.
Oh,
But
well,
aren't you like from Canada?
I am. I'm from Toronto. Yeah.
Let me
Okay,
give
now
you some of the. Let me give you some of the things that our crackpot producer sent me for me to know more about you.
Oh boy.
Okay, to get
Okay.
you prepared. Okay, you were the Bachelor of the Year like 15 years ago, and then he puts nice, like he wants to date you or something. That you're a bass fisherman. Okay,
I do
Wait,
love bass fishing.
competitive
Yes,
bass fisherman.
And a
You won
tournament
that-
winner.
That's right.
that and the fact, that you probably like bananas. That's about the same thing.
I ate a banana right before coming on here. This is great.
There you go. You forgot to put that in there, Joe.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
right.
Well, I sort of
Right.
miss a lot.
But here's something, Chris. So, have you ever gone down to Ensenada or Rosarito to fish?
I haven't done a lot of fishing. I moved to California 3 years ago. I haven't done a lot of fishing since moving here.
Well, you're surrounded by everything, rivers, oceans, and
I know.
but in TG, when we go to Rosarito, they have like these big like fishing boats, and they have everything set up for you, the bait and the rod. I know that's part of the fun, putting the bait on yourself and all that. But they take you out there, and they'll take you if you even want to go whale watching, marlin fishing, tuna fishing, really cheap. They'll make the food for you right there on the boat. We got to hook up one day, and I'll show you.
That sounds amazing. Fishing with Conan. Sign me
Yeah,
up.
right.
Yes. Well, that's what, bro. Me and my stepdad, two of the only things we ever did together was fish, okay, and also watch wrestling. Now, let me ask you a question, because my dad fished off a pier. He fished off a boat. He went scuba diving. Like, what's your preference?
It's a boat now, but growing up, my high school backed onto a river. So I grew up just
Right.
outside of Toronto
Oh.
in Pickering, Ontario. And in the fall, the salmon would run up the creeks to spawn. I was such a fishing nerd that I kept a rod in my locker, and I would spend my lunch hour going down to the river to fish for salmon. And then I would come back for classes in the afternoon smelling like fish. That's a real thing.
Right. And what was so cool about like being on a pier? Because, for example, if while you were passing everybody, you would see what they caught. They
That-
go, "Oh, how's the
They're
fish?"
buckets, right?
Yeah, and then you'd have a little conversation. So, what do you use to catch this, or what do you do? And it was a nice little community where everybody helped each other. My father was very friendly up until his car keys fell into the ocean, because that that was not a good day. But let me here's my perspective on what Disco's saying and expounding on it a little bit. So yeah, I 1000%, everything's gotten more niche. Before there was just like rock, pop, hip hop. Now there's different genres of every music, and just like there's wrestling, you have all girls wrestling, you have cage matches, you know what I'm saying? There's genres and everything now. I think that, to me, the problem that me and Disco have navigating through these waters of the Gen Zs and all that, and the millennials and all that, just because you're raised differently, right? So like before, and how old are you, Chris?
I'm 40.
40. You look way younger.
Oh, thank you.
yes.
It's great
You
light.
did. I can't believe you're 40 years old. You look like you're 32. To be honest with you.
Yeah, right. So basically, what was the last thing that I was saying? Because I am a little.
Well, that's our generation. is gonna be different.
Generational.
Our generation. So what I have noticed, because I book in AAA, so my whole locker room is just a bunch of kids.
Hmm.
They're just as sensitive. They're just as entitled as everybody else in society. It isn't just a wrestling thing. It's a societal thing. A societal thing. And I have a question for you, Chris, because you're like right in the middle of the age groups that I'm talking about, us and them. Do you think we were not sensitive enough before, or we're too sensitive now?
I feel like the pendulum has swung a lot. I feel like maybe it's coming back now. But what I find really interesting on the internet is there's a lot of people that don't have their own opinion, and they will see
Right.
something and then they'll immediately jump into the comments. And I'm not just talking about wrestling here. I'm talking about just everything in general. They'll see something that might be slightly controversial and they'll go, I'm not sure how to feel about this. And they immediately jump into the comments and then they just kind of side with the comment that they like the best. And that didn't exist before. That didn't exist where before you used to have an opinion about something.
Right.
And now you don't. Now you can just jump on whichever.
You know what's the
works.
You know what's the worst? I'm sorry to cut you off. You know what's the worst part is that all we do, Chris, is each other so we don't hurt each other's feelings. So you never have a frank discussion. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm always going to keep it a buck. I've always been opinionated, and Disco can tell you that. I've gotten much heat in my career for being outspoken, but that's just who I am. Yeah,
Still
right.
do. Yeah.
You know, and he's very outspoken too. But in today's age, that's not seen in a very high light, it seems.
Well, and
do you agree with any of that?
What also happens, and you guys know this better than anybody, is you'll say a sentence on an hour-long show, and that one sentence will be taken out of context and then put into headlines, and people aren't seeing the full conversation or knowing exactly what you're talking about here.
Right. Yeah. And plus, too, we get a lot of heat, too. You have people commenting. We readily admit that we use clickbait for our YouTube channel. Like people,
everybody else does it. They use us for clickbait. So we'll do it ourselves.
We use clickbait in the titles, and people will just comment on the title of the clickbaited
without seeing it.
People without listening to us, and it goes viral, and then people start talking about us. But the thing that this is the societal change that I've found different, especially in professional wrestling. Is, dude, when we grew up, our generation there was a bully culture. Like at WCW, bro, the Steiners were picking on people. That's just the way. But it was funny. Like the Steiners are picking on you, but not they're not picking on you like you're in fear. It's like, here comes Rick Steiner. Like, bro, how bad would Rick Steiner pick on Rey Mysterio? He'd twist his arm and he'd go, he'd get him in these shoot holes and everything. But we grew up in this, it was kind of like an accepted culture. And it's like nowadays, it's like people are walking on eggshells. Like a locker room is kind of like a corporate environment, and there's trigger warnings now with people and stuff. And I'm like, good grief! It's like, I don't know. I just. Maybe it's just our generation. When you grew up like we did, you just have thicker skin. Because the way people are being taught these days, it's like there's so many thin-skinned people out there that get offended. Like the wrestlers, I could not imagine back in the day. There was some female wrestler back in the day that she had you're getting mad at the fans. Like fans would cuss at us. The more heat you got and the more, disgusting things that were fans were yelling at you, that was kind of like a badge of honor saying, hey, I got good heat out there. Now it's like the wrestlers are kind of offended because the fans say mean things to them. And I'm like, when did this happen? I don't know. Do you see that?
Well, when MJF poured the drink on the kid,
right?
I thought that's just a great heel move.
Right.
And that's
there was some
bring up to this day, and they're like, "Can you believe he did this?" I'm like, well, actually, yeah.
Right.
Was that the one?
There were some people. There were some people that they were mad, and I think they even got up and left. And I don't want to say the wrong name, but you correct me, Disco, if you remember that, because they were yelling hot dogs at Nia Jax.
Oh my! Ryan Satin and his girlfriend were tweeting how horrible people they was yelling at Nia Jax. Go eat a hot dog or something. Like, bro, that's if you're a heel.
That's heat.
That's the fans do. The people do not like you, and they're trying to hurt your feelings as a wrestler by saying mean things to you.
Right. You can't get worked. Well, you're the worker.
Right.
That's
Konnan, what's the worst thing a fan has yelled at you?
Worse in Mexico, because I was a bigger heel in Mexico.
Yeah.
But the worst thing, I'll tell you what was the worst thing was they would say, ahí va la agua, which means here comes the water. And you think it's like water, but it's cup.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh.
when Jake the Snake Roberts was in LA, we did this big match over there. They were throwing him, bro, batteries. I mean, the fans really get out of hand in Mexico.
Jeez.
Yeah.
What about you, Disco?
I literally had a sold out arena. I'm gonna edit this out. Was chanting. That's but we went back through the curtain. We were all cracking up, you know. But but that's like that would never happen today, obviously.
Yeah.
But just like, you know, back then it was like you wanted heat.
Yeah.
Like you wanted the fans to, like, you know, just like the worst thing you could have in a competitive environment that we were in, because, like, you know, wrestling was like through the roof.
Sure.
It's like the crowds were hot. If you went out there and the crowd did not react to you, you're like, you know, what did I do wrong today?
Yeah.
You know, you're kind of like,
not to mention, this is the best part, Chris, the continuous ribbing that you will get in the locker room, in the hotel, at dinner that night until people decide to drop it.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We were ruthless to each other. Like very, very competitive atmosphere for Pops. You didn't want to be a guy that was not over. You know, like, and we all of us were we were all over. You know, if you weren't getting over, it's like kind of like we're off on your own again. You know, like people were like, yeah, you didn't really have a lot of friends, so it didn't really last that long either, too. So.
Chris, let me ask you, because there was an infamous interview, and I think it was last year in 2023 with Tony Khan and Ariel Helwani, where, you know, Tony gave him a lot of non-answers, kind of, and Ariel came on and said he was, you know, it was the worst interview ever, and people made clips from it and made fun of Tony. But how was your experience interviewing Tony Khan?
Well, so
comparatively,
I think what Ariel was most upset about there was that AEW reached out to him and said, "Would you like to interview Tony Khan?" He's like, "Yeah, sure."
Right.
And then Tony not answering questions was like, "Well, why did you even want to set this up?"
Right.
I had a great time with Tony Khan, but we're going way back here. That was 4.5 years ago. I interviewed Tony Khan before Double or Nothing 2019. So I interviewed him before there was ever one single second of an AEW match, but it went really well. And it was one of the very first interviews that he ever did. So he did Jericho's show and then he did my show. So people didn't really know about him. They knew his name. They knew his family name, didn't know a lot about him. So that was more of an interview of like, who are you? What are you about? And in April of 2019, what are your goals for this new wrestling federation? What are you going to do here? And it's funny. One of the questions I asked him at that time was, what's your 5-year goal for AEW? And here we are coming up on the 5-year anniversary. Well, it's the 5-year anniversary now.
What was his answer to that question?
He said he wanted it to be a household name. He wants AEW to be, when you talk about pro wrestling, you talk about AEW in that conversation. And I'd say that's pretty fair.
I think they're definitely there,
Yeah.
especially in the wrestling community. Then plus, you know, you watching TV, you see the ads for the shows.
Oh,
you know, it's not like they're like disappeared. You know, let me ask you a question.
Now you worked there and made a couple of appearances with AEW. Was that just you know, day to day? You're in town, or they asked you to come? Was there any long term plan? Or
2019 for my YouTube channel was pretty crazy with the interviews that I got. It was Chris Jericho, then it was Tony Khan, then it was the Young Bucks, then it was Cody. So I was doing a lot of these interviews with some of the big talent in AEW. And I also did like MJF and Kip Sabian, Darby. So there was a lot of big names. And right before their first episode of Dynamite, I randomly got a message and they said, do you want to be part of the first Dynamite show, which is October 2nd in Washington, D.C.? And they hadn't announced the location. So they're basically telling me this like inside information. I'm like, yes, of course. I'd love to be there. What do you need me to do? Something with backstage interviewing. We don't know. We'll figure it out, which is, as you guys know, a very typical wrestling answer. We'll just figure it out when we get there. Right. But I was like, sure. But I work at this TV station in Miami. I'm not sure if I can do this. My contract was coming to an end there. So it was like, let's do this. So it was one episode of Dynamite, but I also had this opportunity at the time where I'm like, if I'm not working at the TV station in Miami anymore, I can do more things on my own. I can do more things that my contract in Miami wouldn't allow me to do. So I saw it as an opportunity to kind of go out and do my own thing. I did the one episode with them. And if you remember early days of AEW, there were a lot of backstage interviewers.
Yeah.
And
they were figuring it out. Yeah.
I don't really think they needed me there, but I was there for the very first show. I did something with a segment with like Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes.
Right.
And then that was it. Didn't hear anything from them. And then randomly 4 weeks later, I got a phone call and they're like, can you be in Charlotte, West Virginia tomorrow? I'm like, yes, sure. And then I did one more thing with the Rock and Roll Express and they got beat up by Santana and Ortiz. And then that was it. And I had so much fun. Look, as a giant wrestling fan growing up, to be a tiny little minuscule part of the first wrestling show on TNT in almost 20 years, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's cool, bro, because there's an energy in that locker room that can't be replicated. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's getting ready, going over, looking over their wardrobe. It's real cool to be back there in that ecosystem. You know what I'm saying?
Especially at that time when I was in the very first AEW production meeting. Like they didn't know it was in front of them. And I remember distinctly them being like, okay, this doesn't leave the room, but we're going to go the first half hour with no commercials. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. And if you remember, AEW was the first one to do picture in picture. What's WWE do now? They do a lot of picture in picture. It was cool being in that first meeting and hearing their plans for this TV show that had never aired yet.
Right.
What would be your opinion as a fan and somebody that's inside of the business, hand in hand, that it seemed almost at the beginning, and you probably read a lot more online stuff than I do, it seemed that like the beginning, there was like a honeymoon period, you know, with AEW, you know, and it almost seems like people have, correct me if I'm wrong, started to turn on them. Do you know why that might be?
I have no idea, but I think one of the biggest things that nobody talks about with the AEW conversation is that 5 months into AEW's television run, the entire world shut down and there was this worldwide pandemic, and whatever energy and buzz that we were just talking about completely came to a screeching halt because they just had to figure out a way to make television when you couldn't put people on planes and you couldn't put fans in the buildings. So I would have to think that AEW figuring their way out through 2020 and still remaining on TV had to have something to do with that.
Right. Plus, too, let's talk about another. In retrospect, if you look at that, you know, coming out of the pandemic, you know, how everything was kind of like, you know, wrestling was in this weird place, you know, and entertainment was in this weird place. And then I think this one scene will just be looked at about when Roman came back and you show him he's sitting in the room and it pans back and he's sitting next to Paul Heyman. Mm-hmm. And it's like from that point on, WWE's been on like an upward trajectory, like from that moment. You know, and like they've been on that trajectory. What did, like, when you watch the shows these days? Like, what are you a fan of, and what were you a fan of growing up?
So I'll start with growing up. I became a huge fan in the Attitude Era. It was Austin McMahon was the big storyline that sucked me in, and up to that point, I really hadn't watched any wrestling. I was obviously aware of wrestling because it's kind of in the cultural zeitgeist, but I went from watching 0 minutes of wrestling a week.
What were your hobby? Like, what were your interests that you get?
Fishing was honestly one of them. I was fishing an insane amount, like 200 days a year or something.
Right.
And I played baseball. And of course, I grew up in Canada, so I played hockey as well.
Right.
But I had one of my best friends when I was 15. He loved wrestling. And if you remember in the 90s, if you had a good friend, you talked on the phone all the time, right? Isn't that crazy?
Right. Right.
I knew,
exactly.
I knew on Monday night at exactly 9 o'clock, our phone calls would abruptly come to an end because he needed to watch Raw. And we were in the middle of talking about something. And I'm like, okay, we're not done talking about this. I'll put it on. And when it comes to a commercial break, we can hit mute and we can finish talking about what we're talking about. And I remember turning on Raw on TSN in Canada and just getting sucked into the storyline. And I was like, oh man, I was so drawn to The Rock and the charisma that he had both in the ring and outside of the ring. And like, look, the storylines were just, I don't know, they were larger than life at that time. And the rosters both on WWE and on Nitro were just stacked. So I went from watching no wrestling to watching everything. And now I watch a lot, although I will say the great thing about watching wrestling now is you can keep up with what's going on by watching clips on Twitter, clips on Instagram. And this is a roundabout way of me saying, guys, ratings don't matter. Everybody talks about ratings all the time. People watch television so differently now than they did in 1998.
That's true. However, to the point of like you making that, the wrestling business kind of, wrestling fans follow the product. They follow the like you said, you can catch, a 15-minute, you can take 15 minutes catching up on all the wrestling for the week if you just, instead of the 9 hours, there was 7 hours it takes, right? But the wrestling business needs people to watch the shows to get those to get the rights, these massive rights fees for the advertising. And if they're not like it's almost this new way of viewing the product is kind of like, it's improving the business because a lot of people are engaged, but it's hurting the model of the business that drives the money that they make,
It's hurting the legacy version of how broadcasting worked in the past.
Right.
But like people always go, 8 million people were watching Raw in 1998. Yeah, absolutely. But 103 million people watched The Rock return on social media in the first 24 hours. And I know it's apples and zebras here. I know that they're two completely different things, but one of the biggest things nobody talks about is WWE is the 10th most subscribed YouTube channel in the world. They're making a ton of money on YouTube. So there's a different stream for revenue there that I think I'm not just saying it's YouTube, but there's different streams of revenue that I think that are going to make their way into this as we go into the next 5 and 10 years. I mean, look at how much WWE is branding every pay-per-view now or every PLE now.
Right. Yeah, this is true. Plus, what do you like today? What are you a fan of?
I think what MJF is, I guess, was doing in AEW, I think was must-watch TV. I think now that Randy's back, I think that he's just so good, so crisp in the ring. I love watching him. I'd say if there was a show that I'm going to watch every single week, it's going to be I watch Raw and I watch Dynamite and really just anything that's going on there.
You don't watch SmackDown, huh?
It's not that I don't watch SmackDown, but I live in California. All the other shows come on on East Coast time, so I can watch Raw at 5 o'clock. I watch Dynamite. Right.
Yeah, I'm in the West. You're absolutely right. Yeah, we got to watch.
SmackDown comes on in my house 3 hours after it's aired. Yeah. So, and also
it's like you can't be on social media because you're getting spoils.
And I have a 7-month-old daughter, so we're going to bed pretty early in this house.
Right. That's one thing too. Go ahead.
I heard you say the magical word, Miami. Are you from there?
I'm from Toronto, but I spent 5 years in Miami. I was on the Fox station in Miami as an entertainment reporter.
What neighborhood did you live in?
When I first moved there, I lived in Hollywood. And then
so that's Broward County.
Yep. Then I moved to South Beach just to experience it. I had awesome. A 15-month lease because it was cheaper, and I lasted, I think, just a full year. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm good. I'm going to leave." Then I bought a house in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, that's sweet.
So I was more like Miami adjacent.
Are your roots still in Canada?
My whole family is still in Canada. I'm the only one down here in the U.S., but I've been in the U.S. for 14 years now. It was Cleveland, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Cincinnati, L.A., and now I live in Orange County.
Well, what a lame town Cincinnati
Cleveland.
Bro, how lame is Cincinnati? I mean, for social life, it's brutal.
I love Ohio there. I lived
Cleveland was cool, but Cincinnati's different.
For 5 years, and I was just ready to be done with Miami. And like I was saying earlier, I'd left the job that I was at there. And my girlfriend at the time was moving back home. She got a job in Cincinnati, also in television. So I was like, I kind of miss Ohio. The people are good there. I love the people there. I love the food. I love how people care about football there, which does not happen.
What would be a typical Ohio dish?
Well, in Cincinnati, it's that, Skyline chili.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about?
That is.
I do. Yeah, I do.
It's basically, I'm going to get so much hate from my Cincinnati friends, but it's basically spaghetti
It's right. Yeah. What do you got? Anything? What do we got upcoming? Any projects you're working on? Or anything? Just still just continue with doing the interviews.
So I'm still working as a freelance entertainment reporter. You can see my stuff on CBS in Las Vegas. So I'm still doing a lot of celebrity interviews, but the main focus is on my podcast, which is Insight with Chris Van Vliet, and then the YouTube channel. So I just had LA Knight on the show. That interview will be out next week. Tomorrow's episode is with former WWE superstar Rick Boogs. So like, I think the biggest thing is I'm fascinated by figuring out how people got to where they're at. Especially with social media now, we just see the finished product, right? We just see somebody who's either succeeded or failed at something, and you don't see their journey along the way. So I love being able to talk to people about like what got them to where they're at.
And most everybody's
journeys.
Go ahead.
I think most journeys are all different, but they're all interesting.
Absolutely.
And plus, too, everybody's kind of like, everybody was just a guy at one point before they came. Everybody's just a guy,
How often do you hear, "Oh, must be nice"? Easy for you to say. It's like, well,
right.
Like what? We all have a journey. We've all done something, given up something to be where we're at.
Yeah.
Right. Sacrifice something. So how do you pronounce your last name? Vliet?
Van Vliet.
Van Vliet. So
like
pretend that I is another E. Van Vliet.
Yeah, that's what
right.
Yeah, it reminds me of like Alicia Atu.
Yeah.
But her name is a tout.
Yeah, it's spelled
right. But
so
since she's Canadian, I call her a toot.
When I first met her, I'm like, I know you're from Canada. Where are you from? She's like, I'm from Toronto. I'm like, everybody says they're from Toronto, but where are you actually from? She's like, I'm from Pickering. I'm like, I'm from Pickering. And then she told me where she was from, and it turned out we grew up 5 minutes away from each other.
And you didn't even know each other? Boy, you're older than her.
She's like 10 years younger than me, I think.
Right. So Chris, where can people find you?
So if you're listening to this on a podcast, go find my podcast, Insight with Chris Van Vliet, on YouTube. It's just my name. And I also have a clips channel. So if you don't want to listen to an hour-long interview, you can go check out the short clips on the CVV clips channel. But guys, thank you for having me on. Konnan, yes. You're a legend. Disco, I don't care what they say. You are a legend. You're a legend. Thank you guys for having me. And thank you also for the kind words you've said about some of the interviews that you've talked about on the show here. I just really keep it 100. That's all we do is call like I see it.
Believe me, you wouldn't want to hear the contrary opinion if you weren't good. We will bury you. We will bury you just as much as we'll put you over. And we'd rather bury you. To tell you the truth, we'd rather bury you.
Right.
So it must be good if we're putting it over.
Right. Appreciate it. Now, you guys need to come on my show. I really only do stuff in person. So, Konnan, I'll come down to you. Or next time you're in LA, let me know.
Right.
And Disco, I'm in Vegas soon. So let's do it there.
All right. Let's make it happen.
Sweet.
All right, Chris. Nice to meet you, man. Continued success.
Thank you guys so much. And congrats on everything.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Chris. Great stuff, man. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, man. That's good.
It's good. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Man. I can see why he's successful.
Well, he's a good representative for wrestling. These typical, he's not a slob. He doesn't good looking guy. He works out.
Before you came on, Disco was saying that to Chris, like, you're a good rep. You're not like all the other wrestling guys with the black T-shirt and the facial. I'm like, Disco, I'm right here. I can hear what you're saying.
Bro, we've been telling you for years.
No, I know.
The other day we had Jason Powell on.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, we actually promote Manscaped, and it looks like Jason uses it and you don't. Clean, nice, the coleslaw.
I'm gonna clean
you got going on.
I'm gonna clean it up because I'm going to MLW this weekend. Court's hooking me up, and he said he wanted to talk to me about podcasts and stuff. So I'll business it up,